Okay, welcome back to CodingBat. Today we're going to be doing the rest of the problems in Warmup-1. They will not take as long as we took on the first one, don't worry. But before we get started today, I want to talk about a couple things about the code we've written so far that I have not mentioned, or that I did not mention in the previous video. So, let's look at our code here for a second. So, the first thing I want to talk about is whitespace. So, what whitespace means in programming is, well, basically when we say whitespace, we're referring to spaces, tabs, enters when you press enter, anything like that. Any like, invisible characters and stuff like that that doesn't, have an actual glyph that you can see. All that stuff is whitespace. And so, the reason we care about whitespace is how does it like influence what our code means. So in other words, where do you need to put whitespace in code? And so the rule in Java is that you can actually put as much whitespace wherever you want, and it will not affect the meaning of your code. So like, I'm going to just add a bunch of random spaces right here. If I click go, it still works just fine. I can even put some new lines here. I can press enter a bunch. It's fine. I can put a bunch of random tabs right there, and it's fine. I can even, I can even mess with this code, which, you generally should not do, but I know what I'm doing here, so I can do that. So I can put a bunch of inters there. I can separate this exclamation mark from that. I can separate the semicolon. I can put some spaces here. Again, it is all going to still work. Um, the only thing you cannot do without changing the meaning of your code is split up an existing like thing that is basically a single unit. So like this word return here, right? If I split this up, like by putting some white space in between some characters, now the compiler gives a compiler error because it no longer knows what I'm talking about. Because ret and then earn as two separate things does not make any sense. But return as one thing, that does work. So you can't break up something. Right, I can't break up vacation. I can't break up Boolean here. I can't break up that there. But as long as it's two separate things, like for example this name of my parameter and this comma, as long as it's two separate things, I can add as much white space as I want between them. And notice that this thing here is considered its own thing. So if I put some spaces there, this will no longer compile. So I'm not going to split up these two characters here because they mean or. And so conversely, what this means is that you can also remove any white space as long as it doesn't combine two distinct things. Let me explain what I mean. I'm going to reset the code a little bit, get rid of all this extra stuff that I've just added. Let me get rid of that, that. Okay, that's better. All right, so I can get rid of white space again as long as it doesn't combine two distinct things. So like I can get rid of this space here because it's clear to see, the compiler can clearly see that, okay, this is a comma and then this is something else right here. But if I try to, delete that space and combine this into one word, well, first let me show you that this works. It does. If I combine this into like one word, then the compiler no longer knows what I'm talking about. So you can also remove white space as long as it doesn't combine two things in such a way that, the compiler can no longer tell what you mean. So like I couldn't delete that space there either. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about with white space. Now, just because you can delete a bunch of white space or add a bunch of white space doesn't mean you should. There are certain places where it's generally expected that you'll put white space and it's generally expected that you'll not put white space. For example, you should not put white space. And when I say should not, that means I'm talking about the general style convention is to not put white space between the exclamation mark and a Boolean variable, for example. Whereas it is expected to put, a space right here after the comma, in a parameter list. So whenever I'm coding, I'm going to be coding following the proper convention. So if you want to see what like the generally accepted style would be, that's what I'll always be coding in. So I just want to make that clear. And then one last thing I want to talk about before we get started is something to do with if statements. So let me comment that out for a second and write an if statement. So let's just say I say if weekday, return true, else return false. Okay, this obviously will not solve the problem, but I just need to show this as an example. So let's see. So basically, you notice that after we say if and then we pass in the Boolean expression to the if state or to this if thing here, afterwards we put a block here. Remember, a block is anything enclosed by curly brackets. So if there's a special rule in Java that says if inside this block you only have one statement. Remember, a statement is anything that ends in a semicolon. Or there are occasionally like bigger constructs such as this if thing that would be technically considered a statement. But as long as inside these curly brackets, if you only have one statement, you can actually omit the curly brackets. So I can actually omit those and it'll still do the same thing. And likewise with an else, with this else block here, if there's only one statement inside of it, I can delete this here. And by the way, this whole thing that I've highlighted here is technically considered one statement, and then the return true and return false are statements within this broader if statement here. And so that's basically how that works. You can omit the curly brackets when there's only one statement. And generally, well, as far as convention goes, some people like to put the curly brackets when there's only one statement. Some people don't. I generally don't, because I think it just, adds unnecessary clutter to your code. But some people like to still add the curly brackets, so it's up to you. Okay, I'm gonna put our code back here to how it was and run it. Okay, so now we're good. Now we will move on to the next problem. So I will read the directions first, I guess. We have two monkeys, A and B, and the parameters of A smile and B smile indicate if each is smiling. We are in trouble if they are both smiling, or if neither of them is smiling. Return true if we are in trouble. So, pause the video now, please, and try and solve it. And then, once you're done, I will solve it. Okay, so I'll assume you're back now. Let's solve this one. So, basically, if both of them are true, we need to return true. And if one of them is false, well, actually, let me rephrase that. If both of them are true or both of them are false, then we need to return true. Otherwise, you need to return false. So I'll go over a pretty intuitive way to solve it, and then I'll, again, like last time, go over what would be the shortest, best way to solve it. So let's first handle the possibility that that they are both smiling. So in other words, the A smile and B smile is true. So what I'm going to say, so basically what I want to say here is I want to say if A smile is true and B smile is true. So the way I can write that in Java is I can say if A smile, so if A smile is true, so this Boolean expression here that I've just highlighted has the value true if A smile is true, false if A smile is false. We talked about this last time. And then what I can do is I can use two ampersands right after each other, and this here means and. Just like two of these in a row meant or, two ampersands in a row means and. And after the ampersands, you put another Boolean expression. So I'll say and B smile is true. Then I can do something in here. So basically what and does, as you can probably guess, is that this whole expression, A smile and B smile, is true if both A smile and B smile are true, and it's false if either one of them is false or if both of them are false. So it is only true if A smile and B smile are both true. And if that is the case, then we want to return true because they're both smiling, so we're in trouble. And I'm actually going to delete these curly brackets because I only have one statement in here. Okay, so now I've handled the case that they are both smiling. Now I'm going to handle the case where they are both not smiling. So if, this is going to be similar to how we used not weekday earlier. I'm going to say if not a smile. So what this means, you know, in normal English language is if A is not smiling and B is not smiling, then I'm actually going to omit the curly brackets. Then I'm also going to return true. So if they're both smiling, return true. If they're both not smiling, return true. And then otherwise, I'm going to return false. I'm going to run this real quick so you can see. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. So remember how whenever you negate something, this now has the opposite value? So what I've highlighted right now, not a smile, is true when a smile is false. And then this thing here is true when b smile is false. And so if these are both true, then that will mean that they are both not smiling, and therefore I should return true. Now I want to talk about how I just put return false at the end here on its own line. So basically when this code is being executed, it'll first look at this if statement here, right? It executes the lines of code in order. So it'll first look at this if statement here, or I guess this whole if statement that I've highlighted here, and it'll check this Boolean expression. So if this expression is true, it will go into the if statement and execute whatever statements there are contained within the if statement, which in this case is only the statement return true. So because this statement here is a return statement, or a return statement is just a statement that starts with return, whenever a return statement is executed, the method ends immediately and returns the value that you put here. So when this code is being executed, let's say a smile is true and b smile is true. Well, it enters this if statement, then it executes this return true statement, which means that this method immediately ends. So nothing else is executed. So right after this return true is executed, nothing below it is executed. This method produces the output true and stops abruptly. Nothing else in the method body here is executed. And then same thing here, right? If they're both not true, then this statement here is executed and the method completes abruptly. Now, if when we were executing this code, neither of these if statements were entered, that means we'll finally get down here and we'll reach this statement that says return false. And then this will produce the output false and the method will end. So that is why this code works. My apologies if you can hear the dog in the background. Okay, but let's look at this code just a little while longer. So let's see how we might be able to make this a little shorter. So it works now, but it could be shorter. So notice how these two if statements here, this first if statement, I'm going to actually separate them by just a new line. So these two if statements, right, they're doing the same thing inside of the if statement. We're doing the same thing. So whenever you see two if statements that are doing the exact same thing, you can probably combine them and make your code a bit shorter. So that's what I'm going to do here. So what I want to do is I want to say if if either this is true, this whole thing is true, or this whole thing is true, then I want to return true. So I'm going to basically combine these two if statements here into a single if statement. So I'm going to comment them out and go ahead and do that. So if my first condition, a smile and b smile, if that's true, or this condition is true, then I'm going to return true. And then otherwise I'm going to return false. Remember, this code will be ignored because it's commented out. So if I run this, it will work. Now I need to talk now just for a second about something called precedence. So you've already seen what precedence means in math because you have that thing called PEMDAS, which says that first you evaluate the things in parentheses and then the exponents, then the multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So In Java, in all programming languages actually, um, you're also going to have precedence. And so these things here, this or and this and even this not, this negation thing here, these are all operators, just like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are operators in math. And like the operators in math, these have a certain precedence. So the precedence with regard to these Boolean operators here, and there are a bunch of operators in Java. I'm not going to go through the whole precedence listing right now. It's much more complicated than PEMDAS in math because there are quite a lot of operators. Um, but the rules for the operators we're looking at here are, first, the negation takes place. Negation is very high priority. So negation takes place first. And then after that comes and. And has the next priority. And then after that comes or. Or has the lowest priority. So it goes negation, then and, then or. So if I were to like put parentheses around it to see what exactly is happening, the parentheses would go here to indicate that that is one thing, and then here. So I can see that this or is looking at the values of this Boolean expression and this Boolean expression. And then I guess this would also be in parentheses. Although I kind of already showed that this should have higher priority by not putting the white space there. And then this parentheses would also go here. So now that's what it would look like. So if you're ever unsure of the precedence of operators, you can just add, redundant parentheses to make it very clear what should happen. But generally, you should know your precedence rules and not have to do redundant parentheses. So I'm going to remove all of those, click go again, and it still works. So I can now delete this code that I commented out. So that's all well and good. And notice that in this case, I could put this return false into an else, and it would work. Or I could not put it in an else, and it would still work. And I think you should know enough now to see why those two are both equivalent in this case. So let's see how we can make this even shorter. So notice how, this is a similar situation to before, notice how if this Boolean expression, this whole thing that I've highlighted, is true, we're returning true. And if it's false, we're returning false. So notice how we're basically just returning the same value as the value of this Boolean expression. So you hopefully can already see what I'm going to do here. I can actually just say return that Boolean expression, and that will work just fine. And now we have made our code even shorter. But there is yet another way to shorten this even more. And again, I hope like you're also trying to shorten your own code. So if you want to pause and try and find out how you can shorten this, please do so. But I will go ahead and tell you now. So another way we can shorten this to make this even more concise is we can notice like something about the problem here. So notice that we return true whenever both of the expected values, both the expected parameters, are either both true or both false. So in other words, we return true when the two inputs are the same. So in other words, if the two inputs are the same, if A smile equals B smile, we want to return true. And guess what? That'll do it. So that is the simplest way to do this problem right here, is just A smile equals B smile. And again, remember to do two equal signs here. Because just a single equal sign means something totally different than two equal signs, and we'll see that later. But if you want to compare two values, check if they're equal, then you use two equal signs in a row. And again, make sure you don't split them up, because they will now be interpreted as two different things, and it won't make sense to the compiler. So that is the simplest way to do this problem. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so the instructions say, given two int values, return their sum. Unless the two values are the same, then return double their sum. So go ahead and pause this video now and try and do it on your own. So if you've only been getting the stuff that or if you've only learned the stuff that I've told you in these videos, you won't really know how to do this yet. Although you can probably figure it out. It's not too complicated. But I'll go ahead and show you how to do this now. So I'm going to actually handle this case unless the two values are the same, then return double their sum. I'm going to handle that first in my code because it's sort of like a special case. And I just like to handle the special cases first because I like to get them out of the way, right? So I'm going to say if the two values are the same, I'm going to return double their sum. So actually, wait. Before I do that, I'm going to first store their sum, the sum of A and B, in a variable. And so that means we need to know how to create a variable, and that's what I'll show you now. So if you want to create a variable, well, actually, let me think here. I should step back yet another time and tell you what int means before I even go into that. So you notice that now we've encountered a different type. So before in the last two problems, we've only had to deal with Booleans, but now we have to deal with something called int. So int is short for integer, and basically the int type just represents an integer. So we are taking, as inputs, we're taking an integer called A and an integer called B, and we need to return another integer. So the int type is a very useful type for representing integers. And there are also other types if you need to represent like any real number, like 1.5 or 2.6 or pi or e. There is another type that can help you do that. But for now, we're just going to worry about ints because those represent integers, and we only need to deal with integers in this problem. So I'm going to first add up these two numbers, A and B, our two inputs, and store that sum into a variable. So here's how you create a variable. So I want to create a variable called sum, right? That'll be my variable that'll store the sum of A and B. So the way you create a variable is you first put the type of the variable. So the sum of these two integers is also going to be an integer, right? We know that mathematically, right? So I'm going to make the type of my sum variable an int. So I'm going to say int, and then I'm going to put the name of my variable, right? So here's the type of my variable, and here's the name of my variable. And every time you declare a variable, and when I say declare, I mean just create a variable in Java, you need to put the type of the variable right before the name. So I'm going to say int sum, because my sum variable is going to be an int. And then I just put a semicolon. So now I have declared the variable sum. It is now came into existence. Before, sum didn't exist. So in other words, before this line, up here, I'm going to put a comment. I can say here, sum did not exist, but down here, sum does exist. So after this line of code, the variable sum now exists. Okay, so now, of course, I need to put the value of A plus B into my sum variable. And so here's how I do that. If you want to put a value into a variable, you say that the name of the variable equals, and then whatever value you want to put in it. So I'm going to say A plus B. So this plus is an operator that does addition, unsurprisingly. So I'm going to say sum equals A plus B. Now, sometimes when comp sci teachers are teaching programming, they will tell you to read a single equal sign as gets, like instead of saying sum, like if you were reading this code out loud, like in English language, instead of saying sum equals A plus B, you'd say sum gets A plus B. And the reason is that this equal sign doesn't exactly mean the same thing that an equal sign means in math. So usually in math, right, if I say two things are equal with an equal sign, then I can replace one of those with the other of those at any time. So if like, I say like x equals, 5, I could replace x with 5 at any time or 5 with x at any time. Now, in comp sci, that's not exactly how it works. Because later I might say like sum equals just a on its own. And down here I might say sum equals b. So the value of sum, this sum variable might change as I go on. So don't think that just because sum, I've said sum gets a plus b here, don't think that sum always, equals the value a plus b, because I might change the variable sum later. But that's just a small thing. Okay, so, and one last thing about this statement here, and notice that this is a statement because it ends with a semicolon. This is called an assignment statement because I'm assigning a value, a plus b, to a variable, sum. So this is called an assignment statement. Okay, so now I've got the sum stored as a variable here. Okay, so we've got the sum, and now let's go back to the problem. So it says, unless the two values are the same, then return double their sum. So I'm going to say if the two values are the same, and we can use that equals equals thing to compare two values, two ints as well as booleans. I can say if a equals b, if their values are the same, I'm going to return double their sum. So to double something, I multiply by 2. And the way you multiply in Java is you use an asterisk, as you probably could have guessed. So I'll say return 2 times the sum. And then otherwise, I'm just going to return their sum. So I could say else return sum. And if I run this, it should work. So wonderful, it works now. And notice that like before, I don't need this else because when I write into this if statement, this return statement will execute, and then the method will stop abruptly. So it will never get past this if statement if it enters it. So I don't technically need this else here. It'll still have the same meaning and still run the same. So that is how I could write, or how I could solve this problem. So again, let's go over how to make it a little shorter. We can't make this one too much shorter, but we can make it a little shorter. So how could we do that? Well, first of all, whenever you're creating a variable, it's very common to create the variable and then immediately need to assign a value to it. So when the language Java was being designed, they realized that you're going to want to assign to a variable right after you declare it very often. So they made a way that you can do this in just one statement to make it more compact. So here's how you do that. So I'm going to comment out this. And instead of saying int sum, and then on the next line saying sum equals a plus b, I can combine those into one line. I can say int sum equals a plus b. So this line is really doing two things. It's declaring the variable sum, it's creating a new variable called sum, and then it's assigning sum the value a plus b. So this line is like a combination of these two lines. So it is more compact, and that is generally what we'll do if we want to create a variable and we want to assign a value to it immediately. You can do it like that. So that is a bit of a shorter way to do that. So this is probably how I would write this code. There is a way you could shorten this code. So like for example, instead of creating a variable called sum, I could just, instead of storing it in a variable, I could just literally calculate it here. And notice that I have to put these in parentheses because multiplication has higher precedence than addition. PEMDAS still applies to Java. It's just that now there are other operators that we have to take into account. So multiplication is still higher than addition and stuff like that. So I could just put a plus b here and then put a plus b here and not have the sum variable. So this, of course, is shorter in that it uses fewer lines of code, but I actually like putting it in the sum variable. I think it just makes it clearer. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it like this. There are ways you can shorten it though. And there is in fact a way you could do this all in one single statement, but I will not go into that right now. So that's all I'll say for this problem. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so here is the next problem. The instructions say, given an int in, that's just saying that the name of our parameter is called in, return the absolute value of the difference between in and 21, except return double the absolute difference if in is over 21. So, I don't think you quite have enough tools yet in your toolbox to solve this problem if you've only been listening to the stuff I've been saying. So before you go ahead and solve this, let me tell you one thing. So if you want to test if one thing is greater than another, like let's say if I had two variables a and b and I wanted to see if a is greater than b, I can say if a greater than b with a greater than sign. And I can also do a less than b, and if I want to say greater than or equal to, I can do it like that, and less than or equal to, I can do it like that. So this thing here, what I've just highlighted, evaluates to a Boolean value, true or false, and therefore I can put it into an if statement, or the parentheses part of an if statement. Okay, so now once you know that, you should have the ability to solve this problem. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, perhaps you are back now. Let's go ahead and solve this problem. So return the absolute difference between in and 21, except return double the absolute difference if in is over 21. There are quite a few ways I could do this. I'll just do one way now, and then maybe we'll try some other ways. So here's how I might do this. So it says return double the absolute difference if in is over 21. So if in is over 21, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, we know if in is greater than 21 that the absolute difference, I'm going to say abs difference, is just a variable I'm creating. The absolute difference is going to be equal to in minus 21, right? So if it says return double the absolute difference, I'm going to need to return 2 times the absolute difference. And that will handle that case. Then it says otherwise, or it doesn't say in the problem, but if in is not greater than 21, so in other words, if in is less than or equal to 21, it says just return the absolute difference, normally. So I'll say int absolute difference. So now in this case, we know that the absolute difference will be 21 minus in, because remember, the absolute difference is the absolute value of the difference, and so it should always be positive. If I said in minus 21 here, I'd get a negative number. So I'm going to say 21 minus n will be the absolute difference here. And then I just need to return the absolute difference, abs difference. And that should be good. Okay, so that works. Now, I want to first mention that the way I named this variable, abs difference, so whenever you're naming a variable in Java, or the name of a method or a parameter, what we usually do is we make the first letter of the variable be lowercase, and then the start of every other word in the name of the variable, we use a capital letter to start it. This is called a camel case, if you are not familiar with that. It's when you need to write multiple words, but you don't put spaces between them, and instead you just capitalize the start of every word, or possibly not including the first word. So this is called camel case, and that's what you use in Java because we can't make variables that are multiple words because that wouldn't exactly be clear, to the compiler. So that will solve this problem. So of course there are, like before, ways to shorten this. So in this else block, I don't really need to have a variable here because I'm just returning the variable immediately. So I'm actually going to not use the variable. I don't think it makes our code any clearer to use a variable. So I'm just going to replace abs difference with 21 minus in and get rid of this line. Okay, and now that this else block is only one statement, I can remove these curly brackets. So that's a little better. And then same thing here. Maybe creating a variable makes it a little clearer. That's up to you to decide, but I don't really think so. I'm just going to return 2 times in minus 21 and get rid of this variable here. And then I can delete those curly braces as well. So this will solve the problem. So this is all well and good. This will solve the problem. There is another way to do it that I like better, even though it's not necessarily shorter. Because again, shortest code isn't exactly best. You want concise code, but you also want code that's easy to understand and easy to read. And this isn't too hard to understand, but it kind of is. It's got a bunch of parentheses, subtractions, multiplies. So maybe it's a little hard to read. I don't know. But I just want to show you another way to solve this and a useful function, a useful tool you can add to your toolbox. So if you want to get the absolute value of anything, you can use a built-in function. So we talked about how right now, like I'm filling in this function called diff21. We talked about that in the first video. There are some built-in functions that I can use. So one of these functions is called math.abs. And so I put inside the parentheses some number, I could say like -3, that I want to find the absolute value of. So this thing right here, this function, math.abs, this function, I pass in a single number, and it'll return the absolute value of that number. So if I want to get the absolute value of the difference between, so say, I'll call this abs difference, I'll actually just say abs diff, of in and 21, I can say in minus 21. And if mathematically it's not clear, pause the video and try and see why the absolute value of in minus 21 is going to always be the absolute difference of in minus 21. Hopefully that's not too hard to see. So I'm going to take this variable, and now I can say if n is greater than 21, return twice the absolute difference. Otherwise, return the absolute difference. And that will do the same thing. I just think this is a little clearer. It's very clear what we're doing now, right? If n is greater than 21, return 2 times the absolute difference. Otherwise, return the absolute difference. And I also wanted to show you this math.abs function. There are a few other useful functions in the math that use this math dot functions. What am I even saying now? Okay, there are a few other functions that look like this. So there's another function called math.max that takes two values and returns the maximum of the two values. So this would return 4. There's a math.min, which will return the minimum of two values. So this would return 2. And so, yeah, there are plenty of other ones, but those are a few of the most useful ones. Math.abs, math.max, and math.min. This math here, you might be wondering, why do all these functions start with math? Math is actually a class. So we haven't talked about classes yet, and we're not really going to talk about classes when we're doing CodingBat. But basically what a class is a collection of a bunch of functions. It can also store other things, but for now we're just going to talk about functions. So a class is something that can store a bunch of functions. And this math thing is a class that stores a bunch of functions. So it stores the abs function and the max function and the min function. So inside of this math class, there are a bunch of functions, just like the function we're describing right here. One of them is called abs, one is called max, one is called min. So that is how that works. Now, if you'd like to look into the other methods of the math class, the other methods, the other tools you can use, I would highly encourage you to do so, and I'll show you how to do so. So go ahead and look up Java documentation, and go to this link here that says overview. Now, I would actually look up, whenever you look up this, I would look up Java 17 documentation, because 17 is the latest version of Java, so this will just ensure that you get like the newest, most updated stuff. But go ahead and look up this, and then click on this one here that says overview. It should take you to a website that looks like this. It's kind of hard to find sometimes, so I'm sorry for that. But once you're here, go ahead and look up in the search box the math class. So don't click this one, this that says packages, where it says classes. Click this one, math. And now there's some reading you can do. This is like highly technical math stuff. But if you scroll down, scroll past or scroll into this part that says method summary, so you know what a method is now. And this is a list of all the methods that the math class has. So for example, it has min here, min that takes 2 ints. So it has a bunch of methods you can look at. Max is here, abs is somewhere in here. But as you can see, a bunch of useful methods like round, pow, which will let you do exponents, a bunch of trig functions, and just other useful stuff inside of this math class that you can look into if you'd like to. But back to CodingBat. Let's go on to the next one. Let me delete all this stuff first, actually. All right, let's move on. Okay, we have a loud talking parrot. The hour parameter is the current time in the range 0 to 23. We are in trouble if the parrot is talking and the hour is before 7 or after 20. Return true if we are in trouble. So you do have all the tools to solve this problem, so go ahead and pause and try it on your own. And I presume you are back now, so let's go ahead and solve this one. So this is the real line we care about. We are in trouble if the parrot is talking and the hour is before 7 or after 20. So I'm going to go ahead and put this all into one if statement, and hopefully if you need to pause and think about it, please do so. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, it says, if the parrot is talking, so if talking, so first of all, if the parrot is talking, and the hour is before 7, so hour is less than 7, or the hour is after 20, then we're going to return true because we are in trouble. And then otherwise we're going to return false. So that will solve this problem. There are of course other ways to solve this problem because there are an infinite number of ways to solve any problem. But here is how I might do it. Now notice that I put parentheses around here. And these parentheses are required. If I delete them, we'll get some of the test cases wrong. So let's talk about why. So once again, this has to do with precedence. So this less than thing here is another operator in Java. As I said, there are quite a few operators in Java. So less than and greater than, less than or equal to and greater than or equal to, these are also operators. And so the less than and greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, those all have the same precedence. Just like how like multiplication and division and math have the same precedence, you just evaluate them left to right. The less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to have the same precedence. And so the precedence of those is higher than any of the Boolean things we've seen. So in this if statement here, the greater thans and less thans would come first, and then the and would come next, and then the or would come next. That would be the precedence of the operators we see here. And so that means that we need these parentheses, because without these parentheses, then this less than will be done first, and then this and will apply to the talking variable and the result of hour less than 7, which is not what we intend. We want to return true if talking is true and this thing that I've highlighted is true. And so therefore we need those parentheses to help us out, and because the precedence rules there. So if I run this, that'll work. Yeah, so there's not really any further way to shorten it. I mean, there is technically, but I don't want to go into it. Um, but yeah, this is basically a great way to solve this problem, and this is how I would solve it if I were solving it. So it is a fine way to do it. So let's go on to the next one. All right, so it says given two ints, a and b, return true if one of them is 10 or if their sum is 10. All right, so you have all the tools to do this, so please pause and try this on your own. Okay, hopefully you're back now. Let's solve this problem. So it says return true if one of them is 10 or if their sum is 10. So I'm going to, like before, put this all into one if statement because I can. So I'm going to say return true if one of them is 10, so if a is 10 or b is 10, or if their sum, a plus b, is 10. So if any of those things are true, that's why I'm using ors, because if any of those things are true, then I want to return true. Otherwise, I want to return false, and that'll do the trick there. So again, this is precedence is kind of a big deal. And in fact, because it's coming up so often, I'll actually go ahead and show you the whole precedence table. So if you want to find it, you can just look up Java precedence table. And you can click on this first link here, and this will show you the Java precedence table. As you can see, there are quite a few operators in this language. Some of them you will probably not use very often, like these here, and then some of them you will use all the time, like your math things here, your negation of a Boolean there, your Boolean operators and an or there, your greater than, less than stuff there. So this is the actual precedence table in Java. So the top is the highest precedence, the bottom is the lowest precedence. So we can see that if we're looking at the operators we have here, what would come first? Addition would come first, so a plus b, and then this equals would come next because we see equals comes next, and then the or would come last. It's down here. So you can see that those precedence rules do make this Boolean expression mean what we want it to mean, and so we are fine, and that's all well and good. We don't need to use any parentheses there. Now, it's okay to use parentheses if if you just want to be clearer. Like, if I wanted to put parentheses around, like, this and make it clear that this is like one unit, that's fine. But you don't need to. So you can put them if you want to, but you don't have to. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this one is called nearHundred. Given an int n, return true if it is within 10 of 100 or 200. Note, math.abs num computes the absolute value of a number. So I already kind of told you about this function. But yeah, go ahead and solve this one on your own. I would encourage you to use math.abs to do it. And please pause the video now and do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve it. So return true if it is within 10 of 100 or 200. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna get its distance from 100. So it's absolute difference between in and 100. So I'm gonna say dist 100 equals math.abs in minus 100. I'm gonna say dist 200 equals math.abs in minus 200. And notice that I could flip this. I could say 100 minus in, and it would be equivalent. You can think about mathematically why that's true if you want to. And let's see. So we need to return true if it is within 10 of 100 or 200. So I'm going to first check if it is within 10 of 100. Or I guess I can check both of them at once. So dist 100 is how close it is to 100. So if it is within 10 of 100, then its distance to 100 should be less than or equal to 10. So if its distance to 100 is less than or equal to, oh geez, I really can't type today, is less than or equal to 10, then we want to return true, obviously. Return true. And then if its distance to 200 is less than or equal to 10, less than or equal to 10, we want to return true as well. And then otherwise we want to return false. And that will do the trick there. So you can probably already see how we could shorten this. And again, I know I've placed a lot of emphasis on shortening in these videos so far, or I guess we've only done 2 videos. But the shortest code is not necessarily the best code. It's just that for these problems, they're very simple problems, and so you probably want concise solutions. So that's a shorter way to do this. Hopefully you can see why. And again, if I really wanted to, I could, instead of storing dist 100 in a variable, I could just put it in the line right here. But I think that just clutters it up and makes it less clear what we're doing. So I think storing it in a variable is a totally appropriate thing to do right here. So yeah. And you're also probably starting to see that a lot of coding is kind of opinion. Like, what do you think looks the best here? What do you think is most readable, but also concise way of solving this? Because usually it's not too hard to figure out a way to solve a problem. It's just what's the best way to solve the problem. That's what we really care about. That's the real challenge in computer science, is what's the best way to solve it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. posNeg. Given 2 int values, return true if one is negative and one is positive, except if the parameter negative is true. Then return true only if both are negative. So you do have all the tools to solve this, so go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, so hopefully you have solved it now. Let's go ahead and do this one together. So I'm first going to handle the case if negative is true. So I'm going to say if negative, then I'm gonna just handle the negative case, because this is a lot of conditions here, a lot of things we have to check. So I think it's gonna be easier if we split it up, easier to think about at least. So if the parameter negative is true, return true only if both are negative. So if A is negative. So if something's negative, right, that means it's less than 0. So I'm going to say if A is negative or B is negative, or sorry, and B is negative, then I want to return true. Otherwise, I want to return false. And then otherwise, if the parameter negative is not true, so else, then let's see, then I return true if 1 is negative and 1 is positive. So here's how I could do this. So I'm going to say if A is negative or B is positive, sorry, if A is negative and B is positive, and let's see, does this tell you what to do when 0? Because 0 is neither negative nor positive. So it looks like this problem does not tell you what to do when it's 0. Um, so hopefully, I don't know. I don't know what to do if one of them is 0. So hopefully they don't give us 0 as an input because they do not tell us what to do if it's 0. Um, but anyway, if one is negative and the other is positive, so this is one way, right, in which one could be negative and the other could be positive, right? If A is negative and B is positive, then one would be negative and the other would be positive. But also, or if A is positive and B is negative, that would be another way that one could be positive while the other is negative. So, and again, the precedence of this does all work out, and this Boolean expression does mean what we want it to mean. You can check the precedence table if you want to. But if this is all the case, we can return true. Otherwise, we will return false. And that should work. Okay, so there we go. You can probably already see some ways we might make this more concise. Here, I'm just going to say, change this to return that. And that'll make that a bit shorter. Again, we've done stuff like this all before, so I'm not really explaining too much what I'm doing. And then here we could also do a very similar thing. We could say return just that Boolean expression itself. And that would do the trick there. We can get rid of these curly braces now, and that's looking a lot more concise. Now, is this particularly readable? Yeah, not really. So maybe there's a better way to write this that makes it more readable, but here's just one way to do it. Now, let's see. There is actually a shorter way to do this last line here, this return statement, to check if one is positive and one is negative. There is a better way to do this, a shorter, a more concise way to do this. So I'll go ahead and tell you that now. So we've talked about and or, right? We've talked about the and operator and the or operator. There's another operator called XOR. It's not the same thing as or, but it's called XOR. So basically what the XOR operator does, let me actually go ahead and go to MS Paint real quick so I can draw this out. So basically, so there's a function called an operator called XOR. So here's how XOR works. So let's say we're taking the XOR of two values, A and B. Okay, and then here's going to be our output. So if we take the XOR of these two variables, and XOR is commutative, so it doesn't matter the order that we input them in, just like and or are also commutative. If you don't remember what commutative means from math, please look it up. But let's do this here. So if A is true and B is true, and I'm actually going to just, before we even talk about the output, I'm going to put in all the possibilities. So another possibility is A is true while B is false, A is false while B is true, and then A is false and B is false. Those are all the possible inputs I could get. And let me draw some rows here. That's not a very good line. Sorry, drawing with a mouse. Let's do this. Okay. So here's how XOR works. XOR, the output is true if the two inputs are different. Okay, so true and true, those are not different, so the output's false. True and false are different, so the output's true. And then false and true are different, so the output's true. And then false and false are the same, so the output's false. So that's what the XOR does. And XOR is actually short for exclusive OR, which kind of makes sense, right? Because the outputs here look very similar to OR, what the OR operator would do, except this first line is different, right? True, true, true or true would be true, but true XOR true is false. So that's the difference here. So let's go back and see if we could apply this in our code here. So here's how we could do this. So basically, we need the sign of the two numbers of A and B to be different, right? We need one to be negative while the other is positive. So the way I could do this is basically if A is negative or if A less than 0, so in other words, if this Boolean expression is true if A is negative, and let's see, so if A is negative, XOR, and that's how we write XOR in code, is using this this caret symbol, and it's just one caret. It's not two in a row. It's just one. So XOR B is less than 0, then we should also be returning true, and that will work here. And why does this work? Well, because basically this is saying if the sign of A and the sign of B are different, that's what XOR means. If they're different, then we return true, because that's what it says. Return true if one is negative while the other is positive. In other words, return true if the signs are different. And I believe we actually don't need the parentheses here. Let's look at the operator precedence table. So we see that less than, greater than, those all appear above XOR in the hierarchy, the precedence table, I guess. So I don't think we will need the parentheses, and we do not, and it is still correct. So that is a shorter way to do that. Another way of writing this is actually we could say basically that the two signs are not equal. So another way of saying these two things are different is saying they are not equal. So instead of saying XOR, I can actually say not equal. And the way we write not equal in Java is exclamation mark equals. And if I look at the operator precedence table, I once again will not need the parentheses here because the greater than less thans are higher precedence than not equal. So I can run this and that will also work here. So XOR is kind of the same as not equal. So in other words, A XOR B is true if A does not equal B. So kind of another more interesting way of doing that, of doing this problem. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so continuing on, we have the next problem. It says, given a string, which is a data type we have not talked about yet, so you definitely don't know how to do this yet if you are just listening to the stuff I'm saying. So, given a string, return a new string where not has been added to the front. However, if the string already begins with not, return the string unchanged. Note, use .equals to compare two strings. So, this is definitely not something you'll know how to do just yet. So we need to talk about strings. So string, the type string, is another type, just like int and boolean, we can use to store data. So the string type is a little more interesting because the string type just represents a string of text, as you could probably see from the examples. So there are quite a lot of operations we can do on strings, and there are far more than we can do on booleans or ints. There are just a ton of operations we can do on strings. So let's look at how we might do that. So first of all, let's look at the type. So the type string starts with a capital S, which is different from int and boolean. You don't really need to concern yourself right now with when the type is capitalized and when it's not. I'll just tell you that there are 8 types that don't start with a capital letter. Those are called the 8 primitive types, and then all other types do start with a capital letter. That's basically the rule. But let's go ahead and look at how strings actually work. So I'm going to actually go over to an IDE here, go over to Eclipse, and we will look at this so in a little more detail. So I will call this not string. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to put some code in here, this thing here called main. This is a function that I can run by like clicking something on the side here. So, but don't worry about the class thing or any of this other public static stuff. Just know that inside of these two curly brackets, we're writing a function, and I can put stuff in this function. So, and I guess before I go ahead and do this, I should tell you how to output text to the screen through code. So the way you do that is you type system.out.println, and then you pass in inside these parentheses the stuff that you want to output to the screen. So if I want to output hello, if you want to output some text, you can put that text in quotes. So I can run this, and it'll print out the text hello. So this thing here, system.out.println, this is just a very long function name. And then inside the parentheses are my parameters, my arguments that I'm passing to the function. So whenever you put something inside of quotes, you're creating what's called a string. So if I create a new string variable, string is just a type, so I can create variables of type string. So I can say string str, that's just a common name for string str, equals, and then I can say a value for this string variable. And the way you create a string, the way you write a string in Java, like a literal string value that has some text, is you just open some double quotes and you put some text. So I can say, hey, that will be my text of my string. And now if I print out this string variable, so again, if you use println, you can either print out a literal string, like a raw string inside of quotes if you want to, or you can print out an existing string variable, like that. And that will print out hey. So this is basically an example of a string. Now, there are quite a few things you can do with strings. So one thing you can do with strings, let me first, before I tell you about that, let me change this a little more. So let's make this CodingBat. Let's make that the string. Just a little longer now. And if I run it, it prints out CodingBat. So one thing you can do with a string is you can get a character at an individual spot in the string. So let me go over to MS Paint once again, and we can talk about a little bit about strings. So let's say I have this string called CodingBat, or whose text is CodingBat. So CodingBat. So each of the characters in this string has an index, what's called an index. And that's just a number that indicates its spot in the string, its location in the string. So the first character has the index 0, and then the second character has the index 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, etc. It just counts up from there. So 5, 6, 7, 8. There you go. So that is how the indexes of a string work. So inside of a program, you can get a character at an individual index in the string by using a method called char at on the string. So I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. So, and I know a lot of new information is coming at you right now. So let's say we have, so if I want to create a new char, so I'm going to say that there's another type in Java called char. It's one of those 8 types that starts with a lowercase letter. So this type char represents a character. So this char c here, I'm going to call it c, and I'm going to set it equal to, or assign it to, a character from my string str. So to get a character at a specific index, you do str, the name of your string, and then you do dot, and then you do char at. So just like this, and then this is a function here. So I'm going to pass in a number, an int, and it's going to give me the character at that index in the string. So now if I print out the character C, you can also print out characters, by the way. So you can print out strings or characters, and I can print this out, and it'll print out C, because C is the character at index 0. So whenever you use those special types, or not special, but those types that start with a capital letter, like string, you can call, in order to call functions on those types, what you can do is you can go from the specific thing of that type, so like str, the variable of that type, and then you can call, in other words, you can use a function from that specific variable. So I can take the variable and I can put a period after it, and then I can put the name of a function, and it'll call that function from that variable, right? So if this stir was like actually a different string, let's say I had another string called like stir2, well, stir2.char@0 might not be the same as stir.char@0. So what this function does depends on the variable, in that like different variables, different string variables may have different text, and therefore they'll have different characters at different indexes. So the char@at method, if I call it from a string and then pass in an index that I want, it'll give me the character at that index. So I could also do like index1, that should be O, then index2, that'll be D, and then I, in, etc. You could go through all of the indices in this string that you want. Indices, by the way, is the plural of index. I think indexes and indices are both valid ways of saying it. Okay, so that is one thing you can do with a string. But as I said, there are tons of operations you can do on a string. So let's look at one other kind of operation you can do. So there's another operation you can do on a string called substring. So I'm going to make a new variable here called sub. And I'm going to say it equals my existing string. I'm going to say dot substring. So substring, what substring is going to do is it's going to give us a like a sub. Well, I was going to say it's going to give us a substring, but that's kind of obvious. It's going to give us like a contiguous sequence of characters from the string. So like, let's say this thing here that I just put brackets around, this is my whole string. But if I take a contiguous sequence of characters from this string, like ding here, this ding is a substring of the whole string because it's a sequence of contiguous characters taken from that string. And the way we denote a substring is by using indices. So this substring here, this substring ding, contains the indices from 2 to 5. So that is how I could talk about this substring here. So let's look at how we might get a substring from an existing string if we're looking at, or if we're doing this from a program. So I'm going to call the substring method, again, from the string that I want to take a substring out of. I can say stir.substring, and then I'll pass in the indices I want. So let's say I want to get the substring ding. So what I'll do is I'll say, basically what you do is you put that this substring method takes two int parameters. So so the first one is going to be the first index of your substring. So in this case, D is the first character we want, and that is at index 2. So the first thing we pass to substring is the first index, the index of the first character we want in our substring. And then the last index you put is, or the second number you put is the index after the last character you want in your substring. So to show you what that means, the last character we want in our substring is this thing G here. And so G is at index, let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So G is at index 5. So we want the number right after the last character. So that number is 6. And so if I print out sub here, the string sub I just got, it'll print out ding. And so you might be wondering, right, why did they do that? Like, why not just make the second number the index of the last character in your substring? And there are a couple reasons for that. They aren't maybe necessarily good reasons. You can determine that for yourself. But one reason they did that is because if you want to see the length of this substring, you can just take this number and subtract this number. But if that were 5, if this were 5, then we'd have to add 1. We'd have to do 5 minus 2 plus 1 to get the length of the substring. So that's one reason they did it. And then another reason is that if you want to talk about the whole string, so let's say I want to get the whole string. So you can get a substring of the string that is just the whole string. So let me go back here. For example, I could, let's erase those. I could take this whole thing as my substring. It's not really a substring because it's just the same as the real string, but I could call substring and get the whole string out of it. There's no real reason to do that, but I could. So I could say, so in order to do that, I would do the indices from 0 to the length of my string. So the length of my string is, let's see, 9 in this case. And that would give me the whole string. So if I print out whole, it should just print out CodingBat. And so if you want to get the length of a string, you can just, what you can do is you can type the name of the string and then do dot length. So you can call this length function from the string. And the length function doesn't take any parameters. It just gives you the length of the string. So this will print out CodingBat as well, because str.length here is returning the number of characters in the string, which in this case is 9. So that is a lot of stuff about strings. And notice that the substring method is not removing characters from, like this substring str.substring, that does not remove characters from str. It just basically copies the characters in the given range to my variable, to like another string. So if you call str.substring, it does not remove characters from str. Okay, and then there is one last thing we need to talk about here before you will have enough tools to solve the problem on CodingBat. So let me comment some of this stuff out. So I'm going to put a slash star there and a star slash, down here. So let's talk about the one last thing we need to discuss. Okay, so one other thing you can do with strings, there are plenty of other things you can do, but one other thing you can do with strings is if I print out, I can take, actually let me not do that. Let me create another variable. So I'll say string concatenated. If you are not familiar with the word concatenated, we'll talk about it in just a second. But what I can do is I can take a string, whether it's a literal string like that, or if it's just a variable, I can take that, and then I can do plus, and then I can put another string. And again, this string could be a variable or a literal string in double quotes. So I could say str plus hi, and this will just concatenate these two strings together. And what I mean by concatenate is just put the two characters together. So put the characters of the first string followed by the characters of the second string. So if I print out println concatenated, my concatenated variable, it'll print out CodingBat hi. So it just added the text of this string to the text of the next string. And now it prints out the concatenated string here. And again, remember that this plus, adding these two strings, does not change either string. So str is still str. I could print out str again, str, and str would be unchanged, right? So the string is not going to get changed in any of these cases. It's just that if I call a method, it'll return like a new string, or adding something will produce a new string. But the string itself, the text of that string itself, will not change. So you finally have the tools to solve this problem. But if you don't quite feel ready to solve it on your own yet, it's fine. I will go ahead and solve it here. But if you want to, please pause the video now and try and solve it. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this one here. So it says, given a string, return a new string where not has been added to the front. However, if the string already begins with not, return the string unchanged. Note, use dot equals to compare two strings. So that is something I guess we also didn't talk about. So let me go over to Eclipse and talk about that for just a second. So if you want to test if two strings are equal, you can do one string, like let's say str, then you can say dot equals, and then you can put in another string here. So I can say dot equals CodingBat, which in this case will be true, right? So this just gives me a Boolean true or false if this string equals this string. But I could say something else like pair, and now we can see that it's false. So that is basically the equals method, which you do need to solve this problem. Okay, so now I think we have all the tools to solve this one. So let's do that. So it says, if the string already begins with not, return the string unchanged. So that's our special case, and as I said, I kind of like to handle special cases first, so I'll do that. So I will do that now. So if the first three characters, so actually I'm first going to say, let's see, I'm going to say if, here, what should I do? So I'm going to say the first three characters, so first three, is going to be the substring from index 0 to 3. And you can think about why this works, right? This will be the indices 0, 1, and 2, because we don't include the second index there. So this is the first three, the first three characters, a string containing the first three characters of stir. So if the first three characters equals not, then I'm going to just return the string unchanged. And otherwise, I'm going to return not, and it actually wants us to do not space because it wants us to put a space between not and the rest of the string. So I'm going to say not space with a space, and then I'm going to put stir. Okay, so this looks pretty good, and it will work for most cases, but it's not going to work for all cases. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we get it right on most of them, but there are a couple that we fail. And I want you to notice what it says when we fail. It says string index out of bounds exception, string index out of range 3. So this is not like the other outputs, right? Because this is clearly not output, right? This is clearly not output that was produced by our program. So what happened here when our program was run and it was given, or when our method was run and it was given the input, just the string x, it actually crashed. Our program crashed, which means that while it was running, something bad happened. Like there was some bad, we did some bad operation on our variables. So our program crashed. And let's think about why it crashed. So let me go back to Eclipse here and we can talk about this. So I'm going to once again comment out this stuff here. So, and I'm actually going to comment out this as well. So I'll do it like that. And let's go down here. So let's make a new string. Let's call it s this time, equals hi. Okay, so we all know that like I could get a substring here. I could print out s.substring from 0 to 2, right? And that'd be fine. That'd give me the whole string. But if I try to print out a substring where the end index goes beyond the length of the string, so let's say like 0 to 100, that'll actually crash my program. And if you're running it in an IDE, you'll get this red text that looks bad. And notice that here it says string index out of bounds exception, which is the same thing it says over here. And so this thing here, string index out of bounds exception, is what caused our program to crash because this second index, 100, was not a valid index for our string. So that's why we got an error there. There are other ways that we might get a crash from this substring method. If you put a negative number here, so let's make the second index valid again, put a negative number there, that'd be bad. If the first number was bigger than the first number was bigger than the second, we'd also get a crash there. So yeah, you got to make sure that the first index is less than or equal to the second, that none of them are negative, and that the second index isn't greater than the length of the string. So our program actually violates those rules. So here is how. So basically, if stir has a length that is 3 or greater, then we work totally fine, right? So not bad, these inputs, not bad, bad, not, candy, is not, they all work fine, right? But it's whenever our input is less than 3 characters, like no or X, then we have problems. And that's because of this thing right here. We're trying to get the substring, we're trying to get the first 3 characters. But on some strings, they don't even have 3 characters. So what we need to do is we need to handle that. That is yet another special case that we need to handle. So I'm going to say if the length of the string is less than 3. So if we have less than 3 characters, then I know right away that it can't start with not, right? Because not is a 3-letter word, and therefore a string that's less than 3 letters obviously can't start with not because it's not even long enough. So I'm going to therefore return just not plus stir because I know for a fact it's not going to start with not. So if I run this now, it should work. Now, this is kind of ugly code, not least because I've just put random lines and stuff in there. But this code is a lot more clunky and longer than it needs to be. So let's clean it up before we move on. So I'm going to remove these curly braces because I just don't like them. You can leave them in if you want to. So that makes it a little shorter, but that, of course, doesn't really do much. So let's go ahead and solve this, or make this a little better. So we have, so basically, we only want this part here first. We only want, well, let's actually think about this. First of all, what I can do is I can take this substring, and instead of putting it into a variable, I can just replace that variable with stir.substring from 0 to 3. And whether or not you think that makes it clearer is up to you. But I can do that, and that'll work fine, right? But basically, I only want this condition here to be checked, stir.substring from 0 to 3. I only want that condition to be checked if the string is at least length 3. So basically, here's what I want to do. I want to, so as I said, I only want to check this condition if the length is 3 or greater. So before I do that, I'm going to ensure that the length of the string is greater than or equal to 3. So I'm going to say if the string's length is greater than or equal to 3 and the first 3 characters equal not, then I just want to return stir on its own. By the way, I can delete this now. And this is going to work. But let's talk about why for just a second, right? Because you might think that, okay, sure, like, let's say the string is only of length 2. So it would not pass this check, right? But then we still need to check the other Boolean condition, right? Because in order to do the AND, we should know both values of the both of the two operands to the AND operator, right? So sure, it'll check this condition and it won't meet this condition. Let's say we have a string like no, right? So no does not meet this condition. And then it would look over here and it would try to test this condition, but it would crash when it's trying to test this condition because the substring method wouldn't work. So you might think that that's what would happen. You might think this would still crash. But here's where a special, fact about Java comes in, and it's something called short circuiting. So short circuiting occurs in Java whenever you have like an and or an or, and here's how it works. So basically, let's say you're trying to figure out the value of a and b, right? So let's say you know what a is. Let's say we're doing this here. You know that the value of a, let me retry that. You know that the value of a is true, or a, I'll just say a is true. Okay, but you don't know the value of b. So I'm going to ask you, do you know the value of a and b? If you know a is, actually no, let me change that. If you know that a is, if a is false, do you know the value of a and b? And the answer is yes. Even though we don't know the value of b, we know that a and b must be false. So therefore, in Java, what it does for us automatically, is that it checks this condition, and if this condition is false, it doesn't even try to check the other condition. So if this condition is false, then when this program is being executed, it stops, it knows that it's not going to enter this if statement, and it goes straight down to the else statement. So that is called short circuiting because we we avoided executing the rest of this condition because we knew that the first one was false. And similarly, let's say A was true. And my question is, do you know the value of A or B? And the answer is yes. We do know that A or B has to be true if A is true, even if we don't know the value of B. So short circuiting will also occur here if A is true. So that is a useful feature of Java that makes this this code here a little easier to write. And I can actually remove the else here, and that is looking like a great solution. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so now we will do this problem here. I paused the recording because I needed to take a break. We've been recording for quite a while. And then I forgot to start it again, so I'm doing this question again. Okay, so this question, the instructions say, given a non-empty string and an int in, return a new string where the character at index in has been removed. The value of in will be a valid index of a character in the string. That is, in will be in the range 0 to str.length -1 inclusive. So I believe you do have all the tools to solve this, but before you go ahead and do that, I will show you how you can look at all the methods that you can call on the string. So in other words, all the functions you can call from a string. So if you go back to the documentation here, you can type in the search bar, if you type string, click on the first one, and then you scroll down to this part that says method summary. You can see all of the methods listed out on the string right here, or on the string class here. So for example, there are a couple useful ones, or not a couple, there are more than a couple useful ones, but some of them include to uppercase, to lowercase. There's replace, which will replace one character with another. There's repeat, which I think because CodingBat uses an older version of Java, it doesn't have this method yet, unfortunately. But you can do some other things. You can check if the string is empty. You can get the first index of a specific character where it occurs. You can get a character added index, which we talked about. But there are plenty of useful things you can do on strings. So you do have the tools to solve this one, so go ahead and pause the video now and try it on your own. Sorry, my throat has been bothering me today. But okay, let's go ahead and solve this one. I will assume you are done now. So basically what I'm going to do, my strategy here, is let's say we have a string here. The string is, let's do CodingBat again. So CodingBat. Okay. So let's say the index that we're given in is 5. So that will be G. Okay, so so basically my strategy is going to be, I'm going to take this substring, every character before G, and then I'm going to take this substring, every character after G, and then I'm going to add them together like this, and then I'm going to get my resulting string, so which in this case is going to be CodInBat. So that's my strategy. Let's go and implement that in code. So to get the first part, I'm going to say string first equals str.substring from 0 to in, and then string last. I guess I shouldn't say first and last, but I'll say before in and after in is going to be str.substring in plus 1 to to the string's length, and then I'm going to return before plus after. And so if you need to pause the video and think about why these indices that I passed here are valid, please go ahead and do so, but otherwise this will work. I'd like to point out one useful thing about the substring method. So there are actually two different versions of the substring method. One version takes two int arguments, and then the other version just takes one argument. So the one argument version, what it does is you pass in a single index and it returns the substring of every character starting from that index. So I could replace this second substring call with just substring in plus 1, and this will give me every character starting at in plus 1. In other words, starting at the character after the one I want to remove. So that is another way to do this. one special case to note here is that if n equals 0, then this will just be getting the substring from 0 to 0. And if you pass two of the same number to the substring method, then it will just give you back the empty string. And that actually works here because an empty string plus after is just the same as after, and that will be fine. So that is why this code works. Let's go on to the next one. Please pause the video and try this one on your own. And I will assume you're back now. Instructions, maybe I should have read those first. Say, given a string, return a new string where the first and last characters have been exchanged. So, we have a few special cases to deal with here. One case is if the string is empty. So if a string is empty, its length is going to equal 0. So I can say if star's length is 0, then the result is just going to be the empty string. So that's the first special case. And another way to test if a string is empty is to do stir.isEmpty. So these are just two different ways to test that. I'm going to leave it as length equals 0 though. Okay, and then another case is that if the string's length is 1, right? If the string's length is 1, we don't need to exchange any characters. So, in other words, all we need to do is return the same string we started with. And then otherwise, we just need to handle the general case where the length is greater than 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the first character as a string, get the last character as a string, and then get all the characters in between. And then I'm just going to swap them. I'm just going to swap the first and last. So let me show you what I mean. The first character is going to be a substring from these indices. The last character is going to be the substring from the length -1. And I'm using the one argument version here. And then the string in between them, I'm just going to call it mid, is going to be the substring from indices 1 to the length -1. If you need to pause and think about why those indices are valid, please do that. But all I need to do now is return last plus mid plus first, and this will swap it. Swap the order, swap the first and last characters, that is, and this will work. So one way we can shorten this is notice that if the string's length is 0, then the string is the empty string. And in other words, all we need to return, if stir is the empty string, we could just return stir. That's the same as returning the empty string. So notice that these two if statements now have the same statement inside them, which means they can be combined. So I will combine them here, and that's looking a little better. And then notice that we could shorten this if statement, the Boolean expression here, to stir.length less than or equal to 1, because we know the length of a string will never be negative. So if it's less than or equal to 1, that's another way of asking if the length is 0 or 1. And so that will do the trick on this problem here. If you wanted to, you could not use variables and just put all these substrings into a big line. Like I could say, return stir.substring 0 to 1 plus stir.substring stir.length -1, and just make one giant ugly statement. But I don't want to do that. I think using variables makes it clearer. So that's the code I'm going to write here. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so you have the tools to do this one, so go ahead and try it on your own. Actually, I'll read the directions first, I guess. Given a string, we'll say that the front is the first 3 characters of the string. If the string length is less than 3, the front is whatever is there. Return a new string which is 3 copies of the front. Okay, so now go ahead and pause the video and solve this on your own. And I'll assume you're back now. I will go ahead and solve this problem. So, front3. Okay, that's the name of our method. Okay, so we need to get the front of the string. So I'm going to say, first I'll create a variable called front. And I'm actually not going to assign to this variable right away. Because I'll assign different things to it depending on a certain condition. So I'll say if the length of the string is less than 3, then front is just going to be all the characters from 0 to the end of the string, right? And I could put start.length here, or I could just use the one argument version, which I'm actually going to do. And actually, I don't even need to do that, because if I'm passing 0, if I'm doing str.substring 0, then that's just going to be the whole string, right? Every character from the first character to the end is just the whole string. So front can actually just be stir here. But otherwise, if the length is greater than or equal to 3, then front is going to equal the substring from indices 0 to 3. Okay, And now it says return the first three characters, return 3 copies, a string that contains 3 copies of the front. So all I need to do that is front plus front plus front. There we go. That will solve the problem here. So there is a faster way, or not a faster, but a more concise way to do that, which I'll show you here. And I'm actually not going to really explain it much. You should be able to figure it out on your own, or understand what it means on your own. So here's one way I could basically condense all that if statement stuff into one line. I could say string front equals start.substring, and now I'm going to say math.min start.length 3. Okay, so the second argument that I'm passing to substring is the result of this function call. This is like a nested function call. So the second argument to substring is going to be the minimum of either the length of the string or 3. So if the length of the string is 3 or greater, then this whole thing here will just evaluate to 3. But if the length of the string is less than 3, this will evaluate to the length of the string, which is exactly what we were doing with the if statements there. So this is just an even more concise way of writing this. And I like this solution because it's not like, oh, just, apply rules and like delete curly brackets to make it shorter. This is actually takes some thinking. So this is a fun solution, fun way to, or a nice way to shorten this code here. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so once again, you have all the tools to do this. It says given a string, take the last character and return a new string with the last character added at the front and back. So cat yields tcat t. The original string will be length 1 or more. All right, so you can definitely do this. So go ahead and pause and try it on your own. Okay, so we can go ahead and solve this. So I'm going to get the last character as a string. So I'm going to say start.substring, the length minus 1. And then, let's see. All I need to do is return last plus stir plus last. And that really is all we need to do for this problem. If they gave us the special case of like an empty string, then we would have to handle that perhaps. But they said the original string will be length 1 or more, so we are totally fine here to write this code here. So that was a pretty simple one. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so this one uses a new feature, or a new operator that we haven't seen yet. It uses something called the mod operator. And this is not an operator that you have in math, so we need to talk about it here. So basically, what the mod operator does is you give it 2 numbers, and it returns the remainder of the 2 numbers. So let's go. I'm actually going to go over to an IDE and talk about this. So this is called or35. Okay, so let's go over here, and let me clear this stuff here. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So let's look at what mod means. So if I say, I'll just call this endIm. So if I say, for example, what should I do? Let's do 8 mod 5. So 8 mod 5, what this means, what this will evaluate to, is the remainder of doing the division 8 divided by 5. So this will always be an integer. If you do an integer mod an integer, the result will be an integer. And so if I print this out, the remainder of 8 divided by 5 is 3. So that's basically what the mod operator does, is it gives you the remainder. And so notice that if you want to check if something is a multiple of another number, that is the same as checking if the remainder of modding by that number is 0. So if I want to check if a number is divisible by 2, all I need to do is check its remainder mod 2. So if I say 42 mod 2, if this equals 0, then 42 is divisible by 2. If this equals a number other than 0, then the number is not divisible by 2. So that is basically how the mod operator works. A brief note about the sign of the results of the mod operator. So if you take a number, if you take a, let me actually just print these all out. So if you take a negative number mod a positive number, you'll get, let me comment out this first line. By the way, if you put slash slash at the front of a line, that will comment out that line, and only that line. So that's another way of commenting out things. So if you mod two things with different signs, you'll get a negative output. Or actually, sorry. I need to refresh myself on the rules for mod with regard to signs. So let me get all the possibilities here. So basically the sign of the result of A mod B is the same as the sign of A. So if the first number is negative, the result is negative. If the first number is positive, the result is positive. But otherwise, the absolute value is the same, regardless of the signs of the inputs. So that's not something you really need to worry about with mod, is the signs. You don't usually need to care about that, but it's just something to know. So that's what the mod operator does. So go ahead and try this one on your own. You should have the tools to do it now. You need to return true if the given non-negative number is a multiple of 3 or 5. So go ahead and try this on your own, and then I'll solve it. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this one. So to check if something is a multiple of 3, I'm going to say boolean is mul, I'm going to say mul3 is mul3, or I'll just say mul3 actually. So it is going to be a multiple of 3 if the number mod 3 equals 0. And if we check the precedence table, we see that mod has the same precedence, that's mod there, has the same precedence as multiplication and division. So that means, particularly that means that it is higher than equals equals. So it's a multiple of 3 if in mod 3 equals 0, and then it's a multiple of 5 if in mod 5 equals 0. And it says return true if it is a multiple of 3 or a multiple of 5. So that will do the trick there. And let's see, what have I done? I put a random space there. Okay, so there we go. That works. So let's see. Let's see what else, if there is any way to make this shorter. So there actually is. We could put this all into one line if we wanted to. You could say if return in mod 3 equals 0 or in mod 5 equals 0, and that will also work the same here. And the precedence, you can check the precedence table. It does work out here when we don't need any parentheses. So that is how we could do that problem. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, front 22. Given a string, take the first two chars and return the string with the two chars added at both the front and the back. So kitten yields ki, kitten, ki. If the string length is less than 2, use whatever chars are there. So this is like the one we did before, but a little more complicated. So go ahead and try this one on your own, and I will be back with the solution. Okay, let's solve this one. So I'm going to get the front of the string again. I'm going to get like the first two characters. So I'm going to say, I'm going to actually use the math.min thing we talked about earlier. It's going to say string front equals start.substring 0 to the minimum of of the length of the string and 2. It doesn't matter what order you put the arguments to, or what order you pass the arguments to min. So that's going to be the front, and I just need to return front plus the string plus the front. And that'll solve that one there. This is the same strategy we used on the other problem, front 3 I think it was. So that is how we're going to solve this one. Pretty straightforward solution there. Okay, so next one. It says given a string, return true if the string starts with hi and false otherwise. Please try this one on your own and I'll be back. Okay, so if you have looked at the documentation for the string class. And when I say look at the documentation, I mean this page here. This is what we call the documentation or the docs for something in Java. Is this page on this website here, docs.oracle.com, that has all the methods, all the stuff about something. So if you've scoured the docs of string, the string type, then you'll actually see that there's a method that's conveniently called startsWith. And so, if we want to do this, we can do this whole problem in one line. We can just say return stir.starts_with_hi, and that will solve the problem. So that was certainly easy. Now, if you didn't know about that method, well, first of all, now you do, and you should use it in the future. But if you didn't, I'll go over how to solve it without using the startsWith method. So, first of all, what I'm going to say is if the length of the string is less than 2, it obviously cannot start with hi. So I'm going to return false. And then if otherwise, I'm just going to return if, I don't need to put that in quotes. I'm going to return true if the substring from 0 to 2 equals hi. And that'll be good there. So that's how you could do if you didn't know about the starts with method. But now you do, so it is a nice convenient one. There's also an ends with method too, by the way. And let's go on to the next one. As you can see, we're picking up the pace here, finally. After like, over an hour, I think almost 2 hours if you include the first video, we are finally picking up the pace. So as you can see, once we've got a lot of those prerequisite knowledge in, we can go through these problems quite a bit faster. Again, so now basically most of the time is going to be you solving the problem on your own, whereas previously most of the time was like me explaining things to you. So, but now I've explained a lot of things to you, and I know it's been a lot of information coming fast. But now the ball's in your court. You have a lot of the time is going to be you thinking independently now, and me just going through the solution pretty quickly. But let's do this next one. Given two temperatures, return true if one is less than 0 and the other is greater than 100. So I can do this pretty simply. If one is less than 0 and the other is greater than 100, then I of course want to return true. But they could also be swapped, right? Temp2 could be the one that's less than 0, while temp1 is the one that's greater than 100. And so I'm going to return true. And then otherwise I'll just return false. Please combine these if statements if you did it this way. I would like you to combine these if statements if you can, and which I will do now. So you can see that that's just another way of writing this problem. We can't really do any fancy tricks with XOR here like we did on that other problem. So this is about the best you can get here. Well, actually, I guess not. You could put this all in one line if you just said return the value of this Boolean expression. Then that'll also do the trick there. So another not too complicated one there. Okay, next one says given two int values, return true if either of them is in the range from 10 to 20 inclusive. And by the way, if you see inclusive, if you see a range of numbers and then afterwards inclusive, that means we're including the two endpoints of the range. So this range here includes the values 10 and 20. So go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, I'll assume you've done that now. Let's go ahead and solve this. So return true if either one of them is in the range 10 to 20. So if A, I'm just gonna do this as two if statements. If A is in the range 10 to 20, that means if A is greater than or equal to 10 and A is less than or equal to 20, then A is in the range 10 to 20. So I'll return true, sorry. And then if B is greater than or equal to 10 and B is less than or equal to 20, we can return true there. Otherwise, we're going to return false, and that'll do the trick. Oh, no, it won't. If either of them is in the range 10 to 20. So I just put the wrong number there. There we go. All right. So that is how you could solve this one. Like before, you could combine these if statements and solve it that way. And then also like before, you could put this all into one return statement and do that. I'm actually going to go back for a second because I want to show you how you might write another function to help you solve this problem. So I'm going to write another function real quick. So I'm going to, so let's think about how the structure of this function works, right? Or how we write it. So first we put the return type of the function, and then we put the name of the function, we put the parameters, and then we put the body of the function, or in other words, we put this block here. that tells us what the function does. So I'm going to write a method here that's going to return true if a given number is in the range 10 to 20. So I'm going to call it Boolean, I'll call it in range, I'll say int x. And notice that I don't have to put the word public. I can if I want to. I think I can if I want to at least. But you don't have to put the word public here. Again, we're not really talking about what public means right now because it's not relevant to anything we do in CodingBat. But you could write a helper method down here if you want to. By the way, again, I'm using a lot of terms, not really exactly, I have to keep reminding myself that there are only certain things I've told you so far. So a helper method is a method that helps you write another method pretty intuitively, I think, is that definition. So let's write the inRange method here. So x is in range if x is greater than or equal to 10 and it's less than or equal to 20. And so now I can use my function inside of my other function. So I can say if a is in range or b is in range, I want to return true, and I don't need this part here, and that will also solve the problem. And let me just make sure that I can put public. It doesn't matter, but yeah, okay. So you don't need to put public. And then, of course, I could condense this down if I want to. Now, using an extra helper method on this for this problem is kind of overkill, but there are other problems where it's very convenient to write your own helper method. So I just wanted to show you that in case you'd like to do that on other problems. Okay, so so let's go ahead and I need to stop clicking go. Let's do the next one. So we'll say that a number is a teen if it is in the range 13 to 19. Given three int values, return true if one or more of them are teen. I think that's a grammatical error. But given three int values, return true if one or more of them is a teen. Okay, so I don't know if that's a grammatical error. I'm a comp sci person, not an English person. Okay, so let's do this here. So I'm actually going to write another helper method because I just like writing helper methods because they make your code a lot more readable when you can, give a name to some code. But of course you do not have to. So I'm actually going to say isTeen actually. That'll be better. More descriptive name. So x is a teen if it's greater than or equal to 13 or, oh, and I don't remember if I said pause the video and try this on your own, but do that. Okay, so that will be the conditions for something to be a teen, and then I'll return true if any of them are a teen. So when it says one or more of them are a teen, that's the same as asking are any of them a teen. So return true if A is a teen or B is a teen or C is a teen. There we go. Actually, wait. Let's see. I maybe don't know how to read directions. Return true if one or more of them are a teen. Oh, sorry. I put or instead of and. Classic mistake. All right, there we go. That is how we could solve that problem there. Right, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, so given two int values, return true if one or the other is a teen, but not both. Whenever you see one or the other, but not both, there's a useful operator you should be thinking about called XOR. So go ahead and try this one on your own, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, so let's do this. So I'm going to put isTeen again, and I'm going to cheat and copy my code. So there's my isTeen method. And then let's do this. So what do we need to do here? Return true if one is a teen or the other, but not both. So I'm just going to return if one is a teen or the other, but not both. And that will solve it. So XOR, a very useful operator that we talked about earlier. All right, delDel. Given a string, if the string del appears starting at index 1, return a string where del has been deleted. Otherwise, return the string unchanged. So you do have the tools to do this, so please try this on your own. Okay, let's go ahead and solve it together. So let's see, we need to delete del, but only if it appears starting at index 1. So let's think about this. There are going to be some special cases we need to handle. The first is that, well, let's think about this. If the length of the string is less than 4, there's no way it could have del starting at index 1, right? Because in order for it to have del starting at index 1, it would have to be 4 characters, right? Some character at the beginning, and then del. So that'd be 4 characters. And remember that index 1 is not the first index, it's actually the second index. It's the second character. So if the length is less than 4, we want to return the string unchanged, because we know it does not have del starting at index 1. And now what we need to do is we need to say if the substring, actually I'll just say, what should I do? I guess I can put this all into the if statement. I'll say if the substring from 1 to 4 is del, then we want to omit that part from the string. So I'm going to say, so basically, I'm just going to get the part before del, get the part after del, and add them together, concatenate them together. So I'm going to say return stir.substring from 0 to 1 plus stir.substring from, let's see, 4 to the end. And then otherwise, if it does not contain del starting at index 1, I want to return it unchanged as the directions say. So there we go. That will solve the problem here. Now I'd like to point out that usually when we're concatenating strings, both the thing on the left and the right have to be strings. So the thing on the left and the right side of this plus sign have to be strings. However, if you put a string and a char together and you try to add them, remember char is a data type that we talked about real briefly. We haven't seen in any of these coding problems yet, our CodingBat problems. So whenever I'm saying stir.substring 0 to 1, that's just giving me a string that only contains one character, the first character of stir. Another way of just getting the first character of stir is saying stir.char at 0. And if you add a char to a string, or a string to a char, doesn't matter the order, the char will be automatically converted to a string before they're concatenated. And of course, when a char gets converted to a string, it just becomes a string that contains only that char. So there we go. That will also solve the problem, whichever way you'd like to do it. It does not matter in this case. Now let's see here. I think we can actually make this a little more concise if we take advantage of short circuiting, like we did on a previous problem. We can write that code, and that will also do the trick. You can pause and think about why that works now, if you'd like to. But let's go on to the next one. Okay, so it says, this next problem says, return true if the given string begins with mix, except the im can be anything. So pix and 9ix all count. So mix snacks, pick snacks, piz snacks are the examples. Okay, so please try this one on your own, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so let's see. So basically this problem is just saying return true if the second character is I and the third character is X. That's all it's really saying. So in order for that to be true, let's see. The length of the string has to be at least 3 in order for like the second and third character to be IX. So the length of the string has to be at least 3, and the substring from indices 1 to 3 has to equal IX. So if that's the case, we know we have to return true, and otherwise we're going to return false. You can see gradually as I do more of these problems, I'm starting to skip steps. I'm starting to explain less because I'm assuming you're getting the hang of it. And if you are trying all these problems individually on your own, you should be able to follow along, even though I'm explaining less and less as I go through these. So I could, of course, shorten this and write it like this as well, which I will do. So there you go. Let's go on to the next one. Given a string, return a string made of only the first 2 characters if present. However, include the first character only if it's an O, and include the second only if it's a Z. So Ozymandias. Oh, we read that poem in English class. Okay, I'm just realizing that if you're a senior, you will recognize that word. So Ozymandias yields Oz. Okay, so an interesting problem here, but you can definitely solve it. So please pause and try that on your own. Okay, so let's solve this one now. So basically, we don't care about anything except the first 2 characters. So I really don't care about those. So I just need to include the first character if it's O, include the second character if it's Z. So there are plenty of ways to solve this. I'm just going to do the first that came to my mind. So I'm going to make a result string result. I'm going to just start it out as the empty string. And I'm going to add to this result as I look at my, my string here. So if the first character of my string, so if the character at index 0 in my string, that's the first character, equals an O, and by the way, if you want to write a single character, like that is a char, you put it in single quotes. If you want to do a string that contains one character, you put it in double quotes. So single quotes is a char, and stir.charAt, the charAt method returns a char, and we want to compare chars to chars. So I'm going to say if the charAt, the character at index 0 equals the character O, then I'm going to say result equals result plus O. So inside of my result variable, I'm going to store whatever the current value of result is, plus the string that contains just O. Now in this case, it doesn't matter if we use single or double quotes because right, the thing I just told you on the last problem, or I think the last problem, that if you add a char to a string, it will implicitly convert the char to a string. But I'm just going to leave it as a string here. So that'll do that part, and then I just need to check if the second character is a Z, then I will include it there, and then I can just return the result, and that might work, but it doesn't. Okay, so there's a special case I need to handle, which is that if the length of the string is less than 2. So what I'm going to say here is, how should I do this? So I'm going to check for each of these that the index I'm passing in here is valid before I check it. So I'm going to say if start.length, the length of the string is at least 1. So if it has at least one character, I'm going to check that. And then if it has at least 2 characters, I'm going to check that. And now that should work. These are safety guards that make sure we don't crash when it tries to execute this because, once again, of short-circuiting, a very useful thing. So that's how we could solve this one. There are other ways to solve it. I'm not actually convinced that this is the best one, but you can solve it however you'd like. But this is how I would do it without thinking too hard about a better solution. So that is that problem. Let's go on to the next one. Given 3 int values, a, b, and c, return the largest. And before you do this, I challenge you to do it all in one statement. So please pause and try that now. Okay, let's go ahead and do it. I'm just going to write this statement, and you will hopefully be able to see why it works. So I'm going to return the maximum value. So the math.max method, it only accepts 2 numbers, right? 2 ints. And it returns the maximum of those 2 ints. But we have 3 ints. So the maximum of 3 numbers, what I can do is I can take the maximum of 2 of those numbers and then compare it to the third number and find them, and thereby find the maximum of all 3 numbers. So I can find the maximum of A and B and C. And that will give me the maximum of all 3 numbers. Again, if you need to think about mathematically why this works, please go ahead and do so. Okay, given 2 int values, return whichever value is nearest to 10 or 0 in the event of a tie. Note that math.absin returns the absolute value of a number. Once again, please pause this video and try it on your own. Okay, so let's do this. I don't know why I clicked go. Okay, so I'm getting a little too eager. I have been sitting here for quite a while. Okay, so return whichever value is nearest to the value 10. Okay, so I'm going to get the distance. I'm going to say the distance of each number to 10. So I'm going to say a10 equals math.abs10 minus a. We've done stuff like this before. Int b10 equals absolute value of 10 to b from 10 to b, or the distance from 10 to b. So I want to return the one that is nearest to 10. So if the distance from a to 10 is less than b to 10, then I should return a. if the distance from A to, or from B to 10 is less than the distance from A to 10, I should return B. And then in the event of a tie, so in other words, if neither of these conditions is true, you can think about this logically, if neither of these if statements were entered, then we know that A10 must equal B10, and therefore we have a tie, so we should return 0. And there we go. So that is how we could solve this problem here. I'm trying to think real quick if there is a better way to do this, perhaps. I don't really think so. If it said like return the minimum distance of either of the numbers to 10, we might be able to do this easily, perhaps in one line. But yeah, like when it says return the actual number that's closest to 10, I think this is probably the best way to do it, or the most readable way to do it. There's, of course, always shorter ways to do things. Just as a random side note, um, just like a subtle, not subtle flex, I've actually done all the CodingBat problems with only one statement. So you can do these very shortly, in a very short way, or with only one statement, I should say. Um, so yeah, so you can do these all in one statement. But I'm not trying to make this complicated by doing everything in one statement. I want to, make readable code that's actually high quality. Because trust me, solving these problems in one statement does not yield high quality or pretty code. So anyway, let's go ahead and go to the next one. So given two int values, return true if they are both in the range 30 to 40, or if they are both in the range 40 to 50. All right, so go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Okay, so I hope you're back now. Let's do this one. So I'm trying to think how we should do this. So let's see. I could do an in range, like an in range helper method, and I guess I will do that. You don't have to, but let's do that. So I'll just call it in. And what I'll do is I'll actually pass it one number, x, and then I'll pass the low bound and the high bound. So like, for example, if I want to test if x was in the range 30 to 40, low would be 30 and high would be 40. And then I can test if x is in that range, so return x is greater than or equal to low and less than or equal to high. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return if if a is in the range 30 to 40 and b is in the range 30 to 40. And I guess I'll separate this up for now. We can combine it later, but I'll do these as if statements for now. So if a is in the range 30 to 40 and b is in the range 30 to 40, then obviously we're going to return true. If b is in the range 40 to 50 and b is in the range 40 to 50, I need to put a on one of these, then we will also be returning true, otherwise we will be returning false. There we go. And again, we can combine these if statements. It'll make a pretty nasty and long line, so you might not actually want to combine them, but we can do that. Will you let me expand this box, CodingBat? Of course you won't. So yeah, we could basically ram this all into one line. It'll look terrible, but we could do it. So yeah, that's ugly code. That's how you write ugly code there, guys. But don't do that. It'd probably be better to write this as if statements. Or I don't know. It depends. It depends how you like to write your code. I'll leave it as one line. And I need to remove that parenthesis too. Okay, so there we go. That is how we might solve this problem here. Okay, so given two positive int values, return the larger value that is in the range 10 to 20, or return 0 if neither is in that range. So go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Okay, getting back to it, let's do this problem. So Boolean in, I'm going to just do an in method here. Return of x is greater than or equal to 10, and x is less than or equal to 20. So I'm going to say, basically I'm going to say if, let's see, how should we do this? If they're both in range, both in range, then I just want to return the maximum value of the two, right? Return math.max a, b. Then otherwise, if a is in range, then I need to return a, because if they're not both in range, right? Because we only get down past this first if statement if they're not both in range. So what that means is that if a is in range, then so in other words, if this if statement enters, if I enter into this if statement, then I know b is not in range, and therefore I should just return a. Because right, if b is not even in range, we don't even consider b. We just return a basically. And then I'll say if b is in range, right? If only b is in range, then I'll return b. Otherwise, I'll return 0. And there we go. Now I can actually make this a little better because what I can do is I can actually delete this part and just say return b here. And I want you to think about, actually, let's see. Did I goof this? I might have goofed this. Let's see, if a is in range, if b is in range, return b. Oh, I guess we can't do that because b might be greater than that. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I've been exposed as a fraud. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, leave that there with return 0. I think that's the best way to do it. I thought I could do something cool, but you know, life stuff. Okay. Let me just look over this if there's a better way to do this. Let's see. Given two positive int values, return the larger value that is in range 10 to 20. I don't really think so. I think this will be fine. There is another way to do it. It's not necessarily shorter. It's just a different way to think about it. So let me go ahead and write that here. So one way to do this is to first check if A is in range. And then if A is in range, check if B is in range. And if they are, then of course return the max of A and B. But otherwise, down here we know that where my cursor is, we know that A is in range but B is not, and therefore we should just return A. And then if we're at where my cursor is now, we know that A is not in range, but B might be in range. And if it is, we should return B, and otherwise we should return false. So this is an equivalent way to do it. Let's see, what did I goof up this time? Where are we here? Return, oh, not false. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So this is another way to think about it. This is an equivalent way as the way below, or not equivalent, but you know it does the same thing, has the same outputs. So that is another way to think about it. Yeah, so that is that. I'm gonna leave it as my solution down here. I kind of like this one because it's very linear. It doesn't nest, doesn't have like nested if statements, which just kind of gets hairy. But yeah, so that's how we might solve that one. Okay, so we need to now return true if the given string contains between 1 and 3 lowercase e's. So you do have the tools to do this on your own. Let's see. But actually, let me think. You might not actually. So yeah, if you want to try this on your own, please pause and do so. But otherwise, I don't think you will unless you use some fancy string method. So let's go ahead and do this one together. So we need to return true if the given string contains, sorry, I've been talking for a while. Return true if the given string contains between 1 and 3 lowercase e's. Okay, so I'm going to introduce 2 hours in. I'm going to introduce something called a for loop. So a for loop is a super useful thing. And it lets you basically repeat code over and over again until a certain condition is met. So I'm going to basically look at each of the characters in stir. Basically, here's my strategy. Actually, I'll go ahead and go over to Paint for this. Okay, so eraser, please. Let's go ahead and do this. So basically, my strategy is going to be, let me actually pick a string that has some e's in it. And wait, let me read this question again. Return true if the given string contains between 1 and 3 echars. Okay, yeah. So, sorry, I thought I was misreading it for a second. No. Okay, we're good. So I'm gonna pick. I'll do hello. Sure. So HEEL. Sorry, writing with a mouse, not my specialty. Okay, so we have hello. Here's my string here. Um, okay, so here's my strategy. I'm gonna look through each character in this string just one by one, starting at index 0. So I'm gonna look at this guy, and then I'm gonna basically have a counter off to the side. So this will be my counter, and I'll just and what I'm gonna do is it's gonna start at 0. I'll just say this is 0, um, and I'm gonna increment my counter every time I encounter an E when I'm going through, iterating through all of the characters in this string. So this one, not an E. I don't increment my counter. Then I look at the next one, the next one. That is an E. So now I'm going to turn this into a 1. I'm going to increment it. Say lovely 1, just kidding. Let's do that. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so that's great. And then now I look at the next character. It's an L. That is not an E, so I don't care. Look at the next one, not an E, I don't care. Look at the next one, and no more E's. So my counter is 1, and then at the end I'm just going to check if 1 is between, or if my counter is between 1 and 3. So how would we actually write that though? You don't really have the tools to do that so far, if you've only, again, if you've only listened to the stuff I've said. So I'm going to use something called a for loop. So here's how we do a for loop. So basically, if I want to go through every character in this string, here's how I could do that. So what you do is you put the word for, and then you put some parentheses, kind of like an if statement, but it's actually quite different. And then what you need to do is you're going to put 3 things inside of this for statement. You're going to put something here, followed by a semicolon, followed by something here, and a semicolon, then something after the semicolon. You're going to have three basically parts you put into the for loop here. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to declare a variable. And this variable is going to be an index into our string. So this index, let me describe what's going to go on here. So it's going to start out at 0, and then I'm going to use that index to look at index 0. And then my index is going to get incremented to 1, and then I can look at index 1. Then it's going to get incremented to 2, and I'm going to look at the character at index 2, and then 3, and then 4. It's just going to be a number that increments through every index in my string. And notice that this is not the same as counter. This is a different variable I'm talking about here. So I'm going to have basically an index that's going to count through every index, or basically a variable that's going to count through every index in my string. So it's going to go from 0 to 4 through all the indices in my string. So I'm going to call this variable I, and that's a very common name to call it. It's I for like incrementer, iterator, stuff like that. So I'm gonna set this I is gonna be equal to 0 by default, and that's because strings, the indexes start at 0, so we want to start our counter, our incrementer. I'll call this the incrementer, not to be confused with the counter. I'm sorry about the confusion here. So I'm gonna start this incrementer at index 0, and then I want to keep running through this for loop. I want to keep repeating code. I want to keep looking at characters as long as the value of my incrementer is less than the length of the string. And then over here in this third section, what I put is the code to increment my incrementer, to increment I, in other words. So the way I can do that is I can say I can assign I to the value of I plus 1. That's going to increment the value of I, right? So now I put some curly brackets, and inside these curly brackets, I can put the code that I need to put. So I can basically inspect the character at index I. So I'm going to create a character, and it's going to be the character at index I in the string. and I'm going to create my counter variable up here. It's going to start at 0. And then I'm going to say if the character at index I is a lowercase e, then I can increment my counter. So I'm going to say counter gets counter plus 1. And then I can return, let's see, I'm going to return if counter is between 1 and 3. So if counter is greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 3. Okay, so let's talk about this a little more. So let's see here. So I'm going through this for loop, right? The index starts at 0, and it keeps counting up until, or I'll just call this I. I starts at 0, and it keeps counting up according to this rule here. This is the rule that increments I. It keeps being incremented until, or sorry, as long as I is less than stir.length. So this will iterate through all of the characters in my string, or all the indexes in my string. So I'm going to just, so this C here, this character C, is just whatever whatever character is at index I in my string. And notice that this code here that I've highlighted, this is being repeated, right? Every time for every value of I from 0 to stir.length minus 1 inclusive. So this code is being repeated. So like this char C variable here, you can imagine it's being newly created every time I repeat this code in here. Every time I go through this for loop, this code here, this char C is being newly created. So that's basically what this for loop is doing. Now, I want to point out a couple of ways that can make this, or a couple of things that make this code a little easier. So you can imagine that there are a lot of situations where I'd like to increment through everything, right? Like I want to increment, one index at a time through different stuff. Like obviously in this example, I'm incrementing through the characters in a string. But let's say we have like a list of songs on Spotify. I'm coding like Spotify, right? And let's say I want to increment through all the songs in this playlist. I want to increment through all of like the YouTube videos on this person's channel. I want to increment through all of like the dates in this database. There are a bunch of times you want to increment through things, right? So therefore, there are a bunch of situations in which we need a counter that starts at 0, and then we need to increment it one by one, right? And so therefore, the creators of Java realized that incrementing a variable by 1 is a super common thing that we need to do when we're programming. So what they did is they made it so that instead of writing I equals I plus 1, which is valid, it's still a valid way to increment I can also just write I plus plus, and that will increment I. So that is equivalent. And notice that I'm also incrementing counter down here, so I could also do counter plus plus here, and that would work. And now, if you want to increment by a value other than 1, so like just I plus plus or counter plus 1, or sorry, counter plus plus is incrementing by 1, right? But if I want to increment by a value other than 1, such as by 5, I can say plus equals 5. So that'll increment by like 5. And basically what this is doing, whenever you say plus equals, counter plus equals something is the same as saying counter equals counter plus that something. So these two lines are equivalent. So you can do this with other operators too. I can say like counter times equals 2 will double the value of counter. I could say counter minus equals 3 will take away 3 from counter. I could say counter divide equals 2 will half counter. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that, or a bunch of different things you can do there. So that is for loops. I went through that very quickly. But yeah, so just to once again summarize, in this first section of the for loop, I create a variable. And usually, almost always, it's going to be an int. Almost always, that int is going to be called I. And almost always, that int is going to be equal to 0. So this is just a very common thing to do in for loops. So we create a variable in this first section, and we usually give it a value. And then this middle section is a condition, right? And usually this condition refers to our variable that we created here, right? That's the whole reason we're creating this variable, is so that we can use it in this condition and that we can increment it over here. So this is our condition. This middle section is our condition. And then after this second semicolon, we put this part, which is just going to increment the value of I. We could, if we needed to, we could decrement I. And by the way, if you do minus minus, that'll decrement it, which decrement, if you haven't heard that word, is the opposite of increment. It means to decrease by 1. So we can also decrement it like that. If we wanted to increment by 2, we wanted to like skip over every other item, we could do it 2 steps at a time. We could do whatever we want to do there. So that's basically a for loop, and it keeps executing this code here until while this condition is true. And you can imagine that this last step, this increment step, or whatever you put here, you could imagine that that happens at the end of the for loop. That happens right after the body of the for loop, the code inside the for loop has been executed, and then this condition at the top is checked again. So the basically steps, if we were running through this for loop, are first of all, the first time it's run through, right before the first time it's run through, our variable I is created. And then this condition is checked. Before it even runs through the first time, the condition is checked. And if the condition is true, we execute the body of the for loop, or this block of the for loop, I should say. And then at the end of this block, after this block is executed, we then execute whatever's over here. So we'll do, for example, I++. We'll increment I by 1. And then this condition is checked again, the block is executed again, and then it's incremented again. Then we do condition, block, increment, condition, block, increment, condition, block, increment, over and over again until the condition is false. And as soon as the condition is false, we stop executing the block and we skip down to whatever is after the block, whatever code appears after the for loop. So that is basically for loops. They are extremely useful, and we're going to use them plenty in CodingBat. There's another kind of loop called a while loop, but we'll get to that when it is more relevant. So that is how we might do this problem. The hardest one yet, for sure. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we are given two non-negative integers. We need to return true if they have the same last digit, such as with 27 and 57. Note that the mod operator computes remainders, so 17 mod 10 is 7. So you do have all the tools to do this. You might need to do a bit of thinking to do this one, but you definitely can do it with what I've told you so far. So please pause and try that. And I will assume you're done now, so let's go ahead and do this. So the last digit of A can be gotten by, and hopefully you figured this out when you were solving it. The last digit of A can be acquired by doing A mod 10, and the last digit of B can be acquired by doing B mod 10. You can think again mathematically why this would work, because if you take the remainder of something divided by 10, you'll get the last digit in that number. You can try it out with a few examples if you want. But basically basically we want to return true if A, the last digit of A is equal to the last digit of B. Interesting, this is like BLAST here. Okay, so this will basically do the trick here. If the last digit of A equals the last digit of B, we want to return true. So we can do that here, and if you so desire, you can put those in there and get rid of the variables too. Okay, so we're given a string. We need to return a new string where the last 3 characters are now in uppercase. So hopefully you remember that toUppercase method. Well, it actually tells you here, but we can use that method here. It says if the string is less than 3 characters, uppercase whatever is there. So I'll let you pause and try this on your own. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm going to test first if the length is less than 3. I'm just going to uppercase the whole string. So to be clear, the toUppercase method, it does not change the string. In fact, no method that you execute on a string will ever change the contents of the string. What toUppercase does is it returns a new string that contains the same text as the original string, but converted to uppercase. So toUppercase and substring and all these methods return a new string. This isn't particularly relevant here, but it might be relevant later. Okay, so otherwise, if the length is greater than or equal to 3, we need to, and I guess we could actually say less than or equal to 3 here. That would be fine as well. So if the length is greater than 3, we need to just uppercase the last 3 letters, and hopefully you can figure out how to do that. You could just do start out substring 0 to start out length -3. That would take everything but the last 3 characters, and I'm going to concatenate to that the last 3 characters, start out length -3, to uppercase. So the last 3 characters converted to uppercase. And that will do that there. I'm going to split this onto 2 lines like that. So yeah, I wish the box on CodingBat was bigger because this is actually a totally fine length for a line. It's just that CodingBat's box is tiny. So, but like yeah, if you write a line of code that's this long, that's not that bad. Um, but yeah, that will work there. Um, so yeah, that's how you could do this one. I know it looks kind of messy because this is spilling over to the next line. Um, but yeah, uh, the box is just kind of small here. Okay, let's go over to the next one. Given a non-empty string and an int in, return the string made starting with char 0, and then every nth char of the string. So if in is 3, use characters 0, 3, 6, and so on. If in is, sorry, it says in is 1 or more. Okay, so for this problem here, we are going to, and this, by the way, is the last problem in this section. So at last, we have reached the end. So this is this one we're also going to need to use a for loop, and this will probably be the hardest one yet. So let's solve it. Or actually, first, sorry, you should pause the video and try to solve it on your own. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, I will get to it now. So the way I'm going to attack this is I'm going to start with creating a result variable, and then basically I'm going to loop through the characters in the string, but I'm going to basically count by ins. Instead of counting by ones, instead of incrementing by 1 every time in my for loop, I'm going to increment by in every time in my for loop. So here's how you might do that. You can start with 0, like it says in the problem, and while that number is less than the length of the string, stir.length, so while I is less than the length of the string, we're going to keep iterating, keep looping through here. And I'm going to count, instead of incrementing by 1, by doing like I++ or I plus equals 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I plus equals in. So I'm going to count by ins, basically. And then all I have to do in here is I have to say result equals result plus the character at, and this character again is going to be implicitly converted to a string, as we talked about earlier, the character at this index. I'm going to add that character to my result, and then I'm going to return my result. And there we go. Now, one thing I want to point out about the for loop is that, like the if statement, if you only have one statement inside the for loop, you can actually omit the curly braces there. So that's how I would do this one, and I think it's a nice, concise solution. Now, one last thing. I keep saying one last thing. There will always be one last thing. So just like how we could take an int and we could do plus equals, and that would be the same as I equals I plus n, we can do a similar thing on strings. So notice how we're saying result equals result plus something? Well, I can replace that with result plus equals that something. So a nice convenient way to do things there. And again, this line here, result equals result plus, sorry, this line here, result plus equals stir.char@i, is the same as result equals result plus stir.char at I. So these two lines here are the same. The first one is just more concise. Alright, so at long last, we have finished Warmup-1. This was an incredibly long video. But yeah, I hope you learned something from it. And yeah, that is all from me for this video. We will start with Warmup 2 next time. I'll see you later.